Before moving on to one of our biggest highlights of the afternoon, I wanted to extend a heartfelt and sincere thank you to our amazing B-Civic staff, our wonderful Summit co-chairs, and all of you for joining us in this uncharted territory of the virtual B-Civic Summit. So thank you to all. And now on to our afternoon keynote. Derek Feldman is a sought-after speaker, researcher, and advisor for causes and companies on social movements and issue engagement. He recently published his third book, The Corporate Social Mind, in which he identifies the 8 traits a company needs to develop an authentic corporate social mind. Derek will be sharing these with us today, as well as sharing fresh data on consumer expectations, a few case studies of companies that have redefined their own approach through COVID and social justice responses, and tips for engaging employees in the process. Derek, we're truly honored to have you here with us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome. Boy, I am the last thing here with you today, but I know that as Kirsten and Justin, everybody who's working so hard, I know that they have given you so many good ideas, and I hope that you stick around for even more, given our dialogue together as well. I appreciate the introduction, and at the same time, I would say 2 things to you is that this is a journey. This is a journey that we've all been on, especially in 2020, right, as well. And as part of that journey, I'd say 2 things as we go through this discussion together, and I'll be joined obviously later on in some questions with you. So I look forward to that as well. And that's this way, is that every single company that's listening in right now, and every single person that's working hard to make communities better, the issues that you're trying to address better and stronger wherever you are, wherever your employees are, wherever your consumers are in general, is think about it this way, is we have an important job at all of us. And on this journey, we have to add value. We have to consistently add value, not only to our society, but to the people that we work with, the people that we surround ourselves with. And we'll work as hard as we can in this journey to add as much value as possible. And my dialogue today and discussion about the corporate social mind is where you bring the most value and how you start to embed that value, not only within your company, but within your community and the people that you need to help and serve as well. When we think about the corporate social mind, my colleague and I, who is actually in Berlin as well, Mike Alberg-Sieberich, he and I were beginning this process of understanding and really bringing together 2 worlds. I come from the world of activating and engaging the public in social issues. He comes from the world of evaluation and social impact when it comes to corporate engagement. And we were often left with this sort of thing that my dad would always say to me, and that is, I just don't think they think that way, or what are they thinking in general? And years of dialogue with him together, we realized that we are now in a new era of social issue engagement by companies and where we've been. This era is not so much about just doing actions, but it's about a different way of thinking. It's about a mindset that we approach and tackle social issues today, that it just doesn't become one of the things we do, it's part of who we are. It's part of what makes us a company. It's part of what we call in terms of our values, but more importantly, it's part of who we are as in an embedded part of our world in general. And as we look towards that sort of role of a company, which is often in question over time, we kind of started to walk through a couple of things that he and I noticed. Historically, the first position that some companies have maybe taken in the community has been at times early on in our field, was around being more of the spontaneous, right? Participating in social good work just because it was important right in that moment. Now, it didn't necessarily mean that it was tied to much, right? And sometimes that action happened when we became donors or philanthropic supporters, which is making gifts not just because they weren't strategic, but it just felt right in that moment, of course. And then we started to evolve it even further from companies being committed to certain aspects and issues, populations and communities too as well. And where we've seen that even morph today is through this sort of strategist mode as well. But we call now, and where we live today, is to make it more integrated than ever before. These building blocks of our field, the work that you and I are doing together as companies working to tried to help others in our communities where our employees and our company and our consumers, as well as our vendors and partners, all exist in this ecosystem, is by taking not sort of a certain role as you see on the screen, but rather a further cultural integration in thinking of doing business today in general. I equate it to sort of the corporate social mindset is something that infuses the social and public outcomes into the work that we do, not just because it's good work, but rather it's necessary because the work and the products and the goods and the services we produce for those that need them the most, or those that buy them from us because it solves a need or sort of moves into that position, is one because we see ourselves being connected in this world differently as well. Ignoring what happens in the world while we produce things is sort of not really where the public is, and neither where our society calls us today as well. We recognize, as every leader that's on here, is that the work that we do has such a broader impact than just facilitating a relationship between a consumer and a company. The work that we do, that we provide in our products, goods, and services provides things to our communities that they need to be supportive of their families and loved ones, to support them on their routes and elements to get from one place to be, or even better, it supports them in this interconnected world to maintain the connections and relationships that we have. This is the mindset today that we're talking about, because we can have values, right? We can have things on paper that say we do good work. But the question now becomes, are we really thinking that way? And if we think that way, do we operate it consistently over time? Because communities and societies, our people, look to companies in that way to play that role as well. Now, some may think that role is a challenging role, especially given some of the social issues today, but don't worry, we're going to cover that topic in a little bit. When we think about the mindset, though, we had to break it down even further, because our mindset is a set of traits, characteristics in the way that we operate. These traits and characteristics are the things that make us fulfill a social mindset, not just once, but consistently. It's practiced by our leadership. It's practiced by others, which we decide with society in mind as well. Or that we live our values consistently, but not just externally, but internally as well. So that also includes that we're not inclusive just in certain categories, but we always are, internally and externally. It's that we're going to use our resources really appropriately as well, that we are going to listen before we act, that we are going to have a social voice and decide how and appropriately we use that voice as well, that we'll be a part of collectives where it's necessary, where our voice, our talents, and our people can contribute and, as I started off with, add value to our communities as well. And that we, through our work, will measure the impact that we have on the issues and the people that we're trying to serve. And that we will, with others alongside, innovate for what it means in our social issue space, taking everything that we have learned in the consumer marketplace, potentially looking for applications and not waiting for innovations to happen on that side of the sector, but bring those innovations forward and help our most important partners in our communities. These traits consistently came up in the data and the research that we were looking at, and the research that we field on a regular basis. And in the research, leaders that exhibit these traits and characteristics, we saw consistently practiced, lived up to, expanded beyond, and reinforced the value proposition of being a member of the community in which that their companies and employees were a part of. And this is a really key thing to understand about having a social mindset, because we can do both. We can have a social mindset as well as having a leader mindset, as well as having our company mindset and our corporate culture in general. And what today's sort of call within 2020 is saying is, how can we not look at our social issues as secondary, but part of where we are in that sort of social issue space overall? Now, in talking with my colleagues here, will be joining us as well, and the team at CIVIC, I wanted to sort of narrow in to talk about two specific traits overall that I want to narrow in a little bit further on. And a lot of those traits are probably things that you're dealing with right now in this moment, especially in this 2020 overall. We must first talk, though, about how we make our decisions, and that we look at society in part of our decision making from the beginning. In a lot of the research and data that we field on a consistent basis, my colleagues here at the research team at the Corporate Social Mind, we are consistently looking at what is the public's expectations of companies. We're trying to understand the attitude or the behaviors that exist around the consumer place, as well as the employee and partner space when it comes to consumer or the corporate actions. And one of the things that we consistently hear is that there is an expectation of the public towards companies to look at and determine how products, our goods and our services will affect them before they're brought out into market. That they will look at and understand how that impacts employees, those that are working closely in and around that, and that it will affect or impart upon the environment as well. These expectations have not lessened in the years. And as some of you know, been in our field, is that you know that these expectations, that some are calling for us to be very vocal about where we stand on some of these things. Well, this comes down to how we think and operate and decide. Now, we can sit in boardrooms and we can sit on, well, I think this year, right, Zoom calls as much as possible, going back and forth and looking at one another and deciding what's best, not just for the company, but also what could be best for our employees. But now we're asking to go even further, to look at our society and our community and the issues and the people being affected by our decisions in general. Because our decision making overall it really truly depends on our intentions and emotions and beliefs of others. We can't act in a vacuum as well. And when we look and see at our own actions, one thing is so important here is that if we want our consumers to engage in our brands, if we want our consumers to participate in the way with our broad products and services that we anticipate, we have to be mindful of the challenges, the scope in which that they are trying to consumer and transact with us and engage with us. And that this isn't just a relationship built on small things, but rather is that the company also understands and believes and knows what its consumers are dealing with. This year in particular, COVID, right? This has been one of those years where I don't think any of us as corporate leaders could look into society and say, how could we not see what's happening on that side and be mindful of how we interact in the public, as well as how our products, goods, and services are being used in that way to help support what the public needs most in this moment. And we saw companies around the world doing the things that they thought was as important now, whether turning their supply chains into sanitizer to face masks to so on. That's a decision based upon a mindset that we're mindful of what is happening in society and will be responsive and supportive of where it calls us next. I bring an example of that, which is Microsoft here. And Microsoft's device division in particular is something I wanted to highlight because many tech companies in terms of developing new technology and responsible sourcing. So it's one thing to create policies in place. It's another to actually engage in those policies or thinking about the different stakeholders that might be into play, whether that's the ESG and the SDGs that they might be relating to. But it's another thing to also bring it into our decision making. This is the belief statements of that division's team overall. And as you can see here, each and every single one of these beliefs and core principles that sort of bring the foundation to this team together is also sort of positioned into one major thing, as you see on your screen now. And that is that we are mindful of where our contributions and where we're adding value to society and maybe where we're not. And if we're not, what is our path and milestone to contribute further and add value to society where necessary? Where are we being mindful that when we make decisions as a group and a division, that those decisions think about society in mind during the productive and innovative process of what we're trying to create, as well as through the full life cycle of those things. That's the kind of decision making that we're talking about here, is understanding and bringing that society into effect. Now, today, I am sure you've heard this word values a lot. I'm positive that, and I'm sure I'll ask my colleagues later whether or not you have heard this word today, but I guarantee you probably have. Now, when we think about values, there's always things to have values written, values expressed, and we hear things like, you need to live your values. I think this year in particular, we have noticed that you can have values present and you can live your values in certain settings, but it doesn't necessarily transmit into all of the things that we have as a company. Because one of the things that values are based upon, it's based upon what you truly believe. We always, when I work with companies, I sit down with them and I ask a core fundamental question at the beginning. So what do you believe about society or about the consumers that you have that engage with you? I didn't say, tell me about the features and the things that you do, that you have, that separates the two. I said, what do you believe and know? What do you truly believe about people in society overall? Because if we were to work together, I would tell them, or we're going to work on a campaign to get the public to engage in the work that the company is doing. I have to understand whether or not they truly believe this and practice it overall. Because today, I think that belief is being called into question, and maybe it has for even you and your own companies as well. Because if you truly believe it, then you practice it, but you instill it and you think that way as well. And that means that if you truly believe it, you think that way and our decisions reflect it overall. Your company essentially becomes that conduit between what you want to achieve in community as well as what your consumers want to achieve as well. I have had the lucky opportunity to work with brands where we have engaged their consumers in some of the most impactful campaigns in the country on social issues. And every time that we do that, we never position the company first, but rather it's through the company's assets and resources in which that the public and its consumers can elevate their own voice for an issue. Repositioning the company not to be first, but to be the mechanism through which our consumers, the people that are closest to us, our employees, our stakeholders, our vendors, our partners, all of those things get the chance to do what they feel is most right on the social issues that we mutually care about, that they get to work through and with our company and our employees and others to address the most important things facing the people that work for us, and as well as engage and consume our products, goods, and services overall. That requires, though, us as companies to be present and to also be practiced, supportive, and authentic. Now, these are good words, but the challenge of each one of these words is that we have to enable and show action with these. Because I can be present. I don't know how many of you have been present on a Zoom call, but really never present. Maybe right now for some of you. I hope not, right? But being present means is that we are at that table and actively engaging in that table of conversation. It doesn't mean that we just bring ourselves to the table, but we listen and we learn from one another. Remember one of those traits, we listen before we act to the community and to the people that we believe we want to help and support. That we're practiced, that we understand from our standpoint what it is we can offer and what it is that we can put in place to add value, that we understand that we are supportive of other players that are out there already working hard to lift up their efforts too as well, and that we're truthful, honest, and authentic with where we fall short and where are milestones and so forth that we will commit and that we will bridge and work on with our consumers and other people to help achieve as well. Each of these, of course, lives up to sort of that mindset. And we're being forthcoming today of saying whether or not we can get and we can practice this. And if we can't, let's find the space, time, and create the plans to try to get there. Now, one of the sort of organizations and companies that you may have heard of, which may even have been talked about today, is Levi's. I bring up Levi's because I've had a chance to work with them, and it goes beyond just their actions, but the way in which that they think and center in and around the values, most importantly. With the immigration ban and other things happening in the country, around that time, Levi's said to itself, this is our moment to use our platform to lift up others in what we see has not only been a challenge against our employees and consumers, but to the community as a whole. Chip, who is their CEO, wrote a fantastic letter, and I ask that you all read it. It's on LinkedIn, his actual LinkedIn account. You could see it from there. And he speaks here about the values that were instilled now more than 163 years ago. He talks about originality, right? The original Levi's, right? Integrity and courage. And it's hard because in this moment, it could be hard sometimes to be courageous, especially when you don't know where the crowd will believe in you and whether or not that's true, right? And so when he says we must always, though, be a strong voice for these three things: inclusion, diversity, and giving everyone the opportunity to achieve the potential, not only at the company, but where they see overall. And that is the thing that grounded them first to make then their actions. What did they do next? Chip, right after it happened, invited all of their social justice leaders into the facility, into the headquarters in San Francisco, to have a conversation about what was going on, to be knowledgeable, to listen and learn specifically, and then make their decisions as they went from there. And each of those decisions philanthropically, engaging with their employees, bringing their vendors and partners along as well, each of those were sort of bent back into the values proposition that he talks about. Now, this is an example, of course, of not just connecting, but really creating that full life cycle in general. When I think about that life cycle, it's not just saying we're going to live our values and stand up, but actually take the actions that reinforce the values, then making the decisions and having the mindset that going forward, this is how we'll operate together as a whole, as a group, and as our own Levi's community overall. Now, he even says in here, confident our business and our community will be stronger as a result, and that some may not agree with how strong that voice may be in this particular situation, but they're confident in who they stand for, that this is an important route. And this is the courageous part that all of us have to decide where and how far we want to be as courageous. And for them, this is where they stood. So that kind of leads us into what I would call is our last trait I'm going to cover today, and it's around voice. And voice on issues, voices on the challenges that we're facing today. This is maybe one of the hardest things right now that so many of us are thinking through. What's right, what's appropriate, what's important. And for all of us, what is authentically us, and can we deliver? And if we can't, what can we put in place to get to the point that we can and not maybe even over deliver in those cases? Now, I'm going to go back to the data first about lending one's voice to a social issue. This is from our data from June and July, when we look at American consumers and their sort of expectations and where they think about companies. And look in the far right-hand corner there on your screen, you're going to see that 37% number. Here it is. The vast majority of Americans see a unique and great opportunity for companies to speak up and use their voices. Now, what's even more important, as you see here, is what happens when a company uses their voice for the issues that they care about? People engage. As you can see from here, even from a national representative sample of Americans, looking and learning about issues because companies bring them to the forefront, using their platforms to educate and inform, and also helping to see a broader picture of how things affect others is important. So what we know is that the public, from a data perspective, supports companies being vocal about the social issues. Now let's talk about that in a second. How vocal should that be? But also, we know that the public acts within it. And as you see here, I wanted to bring up some of the key issues that are at least 4 issues right now in this moment that we have had. And not only when it comes to our race and social justice, but voting and so forth, is whether or not the public sees companies engaging in these particular topics. And overwhelmingly, it is. And so of those 70%, you can kind of see which issues in particular we saw. We saw that the American public sees that they should share a position about and/or engage and involve their employees. And I hope you take this data and bring it inside as a reason to have a conversation and a dialogue about where you might look at with some of these issues. Now, we know, based upon what I just shared, is that consumers see, and the general public are eager to engage, right? They're participating in these rates. But their willingness to become involved really comes with your ability to be intentional, right? To be authentic and inclusive at the same time. When we think about our voice, now these are big words about a voice, and when I often use these words, I break it down for it in this way. our intentionality is based upon a milestone that we're asking our voice to contribute and lead to. I want you to always add the words add value. Where am I intentionally going to add value into the conversation, into the work on our issues already? Partners and people have been working on our things, and this is where companies can add value, whether it's their platform, whether it's their employees, or bringing any other kinds of assets to the table, their talent as well. Where are we authentically going to talk about this and add value? And when we add value, are we being as inclusive as possible when we add value? And when we contribute our talent and others, that we are also looking at the way that we will add value internally and externally as well. Now, keep in mind this, is that speaking with authenticity and transparency often results in a better informed public, but it also kind of helps you as well with the issue. And when I think about how somebody lends their voice, one thing is that I remember growing up, sometimes I would sit in a classroom as a kid in a high school, and you would always see in the corner the one other student who was the loudest the whole time. And I would say to myself, boy, that's kind of frustrating. It's challenging to be in that room. Now, for me, it was always when I was in high school is decide when is it important for me to speak up, be the loudest voice, or to be a silent voice behind the scenes as well. And I still carry that through today as well for you, because your voice does not necessarily mean you have to be the biggest voice on every issue. Sometimes it's just great to be at that table, to be a contributing voice. Now, a leading voice usually happens after a company understands and has done its work effectively to not just match values with issues, but to practice internally and externally, right? And that they are leading the voice because their platform can be the most effective on this issue as well. I remember having a conversation 2 weeks ago with a company where they were planning to do a big campaign rollout nationwide. And I said to them, so just to be clear, can you help me understand why you need to be the leading voice on this in general? And of course, we looked around the virtual table and everybody was like, well, we just thought we wanted to get, that's what we should do. And I said, maybe not yet. Maybe our role in this moment is just to be a contributing voice. Maybe our role in this moment is to help others and be the platform to elevate other voices that will be stronger as well. And that we will be a supporting voice, whether we use our platforms and marketing efforts and outreach efforts, our relationships, our conversations, our assets as employees are all non-financial things that we bring to the incredible issues that need to be worked on. Maybe our job in this moment is to be a supportive voice. So I ask is, especially given this time and what we have all gone through in 2020, decide how to use your voice. But remember, just because you decide to use your voice doesn't necessarily mean you need to be the loudest one in general. Now, a corporate social voice, sort of things that I like to kind of give you some little tips before we kind of move into my last kind of comments here. And that's in this way. First and foremost, on any issue that you might want to tackle, I ask you that you go mingle, that you go learn, immerse yourselves in the individuals and the people that you really want to help. Not just learning about the issue, but be with the people that you really want to help. Understand the complexity around something that exists. And by the way, this ask some of your consumer insights folks to help you go beyond just the typical data that you have to truly understand the socio-economic and the challenges that we're all dealing with, not only in this moment, but what that moment might be in the future. Mingle and be a part of things as well. No one is asking for you to stand up right at the middle of the party, right when you walk in. Everybody is asking you to maybe join and be a part of it and understand and learn. I recently looked at a campaign that I helped develop with a company. And as part of that campaign, an agency was working on it. And we looked at it together. And the CMO of this brand came to me and said, something's off. And I said, yeah, I can tell you what it is. It's told, I don't know these people that they're portraying in this. It's not what I know from the people that are actually I've experienced one-on-one with as well. And that comes from mingling with people that truly, truly represent the people you're trying to help. And that also means that you spend time with your employees as well and your partners to truly understand where they are on this. Research language and stories before you contribute a voice. One of the things I learned a long time ago is that in order for you to be effective in communicating what your voice is that we have to understand how people talk about the things that we want to address. The stories behind that make that community surrounding those individuals who they are, the traits, the identity of that population, so much more. I ask you to put your researcher hat and try to understand what makes that community interconnected with one another and in dialogue and in everything else that they're trying to do. The other thing is when you're doing that, keep a low profile as well. Keep as much of a low profile. It's not about you. It's about what we can do on these issues. You will get what you need as KPIs out of it after you start to understand that community and understand what they and who they represent. Obviously, being brave is key. There are moments that, and I have been a part of those, where it's a last minute decision to decide not to lend our voice to an issue. I've been in that email strain, a string of emails going back and forth where somebody has to say, we're not doing this anymore, or we're going to go forward. And my first email after we decide that we're going forward is, I often say to them, we all need to be brave in this next moment of what we're going to decide to do. And sometimes it's not as instrumental as it may be making it sound, but at the same time, it's that we are putting one step forward and that we're recognizing what that step is and we've communicated it out. One of the other things that I've done too is I've often asked my companies that I've worked with to be brave when you decide not to move in an area or decide not to address an issue. And you be brave by communicating why. And you ask to be educated and informed that might be forthcoming. Because along this way, if you have started to engage with the community, this is a time to go back to the community and say, we're not ready yet because we may not know enough, or that we may not understand enough. And that's what we ask for you to give us a little bit more time and being brave in sort of putting that vulnerability out with your very biggest peers and contacts and friends. Ask for action. This is so key today. Today, we need to ask for action because today we live in a world where so much noise, and whether we can direct people to do things, it's up to us to try to make it as much as possible about asking somebody to either learn something or be a part of something. I'm often surprised where our narratives around our space is less about action and more about just hearing another voice. Hearing another voice is a time and an opportunity. Expressing your voice is a time and opportunity to ask others to act. And whether that action is as simple as your employees to understand more, to learn more, or it's even better is to take the small step by contributing 15 to 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is, to contribute their time and their talent to something. Ask for an action. You'll be surprised at what you get. So as we kind of get into our stage here of some Q&A coming up here, and I look forward to some of your questions, I leave you with a few key points. This whole thing I started with has been a real big journey for a lot of us, right? Our field has come a long way from being in a space where we sort of did this spontaneously, and we have professionalized, and now we have very strategic, and now we're at a place to make this part of the DNA of who we are. The DNA, the values, the things that make us the companies and the places that deliver incredible things. And during that delivery, we're supporting the people and the issues that really are affecting our consumers and our employees. But this takes a mindset. And I ask for the first sort of thing for you to do the next time you start to make decisions as leaders is in the back of your head, or even put up somewhere, is I wonder what, and whoever that you're trying to help in your other initiatives, your values, I wonder what they would think about this action. I wonder what our community stakeholders would think about this as well. All we ask today is that you change and shift your route away from just having values, but to deciding in the same time how those values and that mindset really come together. This mindset that we're talking about is a leadership quality. It's a cultural quality. And I know that everybody here on this probably has a little bit more of these characteristics and traits than some of our other colleagues. So this is what I ask you to do. I ask you to go back to your colleagues and say, when we're making some of these decisions, does this ever come up? But I would be willing to help and support out if you want to see how these things, the jobs and the work that we're trying to produce here as a company, affects our society, our community, our employees, and others. I'm willing to work side by side to make that happen. So the first thing to creating a mindset is starting to make some decisions by thinking of others that are out there and what those others are dealing with in this moment, especially in 2020. Finally, one final piece, and we'll get into your questions, is this. As you go forward and you think about this mindset, two things to consider about the journey is the mindset's always about adding value. And I leave you with this, is that if you ever feel like you're not adding value, scrap it. This is your time to add value, because that's where the public needs you to add value today. They really, really do. Your consumers and your employees want you to add value. And if you think you can't do it in this moment, it's better to spend the time, to spend the research, to spend the resources, whatever you need to do to understand how that value, how you can contribute and add on and build upon what's already into our fields of our issues and so forth. So you will be one of the leading voices when you add value to the work that's being done. I thank you so much, and I'll look forward to our questions together.
Well, thank you, Derek. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrea Miller. I am with Delta Dental of Colorado, Corporate Social Responsibility Manager, and also the Vice Chair of the CIVIC Summit. We hope you enjoyed your experience today. It felt like a frantic pace of just lots of social networking and learning. And I also have papers all around me with ideas. Haven't started that spreadsheet yet, Kirsten, but I'm sure I'll get there. So I'll start off by saying I do have the book here. I've enjoyed reading through it. I've taken notes. The way it's laid out with questions and case studies has helped me along the way and to understanding even more. And I encourage you to do the same, because it will dive deeper into some of these traits. We did have a good amount of questions, so thank you for your presentation. It's spurring ideas and curiosity. So here we go. One of the questions comes from that trait number 2, live your values, living your company's values. I'm sure we all agree that CSR goals should be a part of overall corporate goals. Shouldn't corporate social values be a part of overall corporate values? What is the advantage to looking at them separately?
Yeah, this is, it's interesting. I'm working with a brand in Germany, and I was just having this discussion around the company had positioned things as like, this is how we work values, right? Like, we're going to be friendly with one another, respectful. It was about the interplay between one another. And then they had this other set that said, this is how we're going to do things in the community and what we believe. And I'm like, well, actually, if you look at it, there were threads between both value sets. And it came down to, well, are we saying that we only respect one another as colleagues, but don't respect anybody else outside of that? And I reminded the CEO, which, it's always challenging to get time with the CEO about values. This discussion is like less than a 5-minute discussion. And I walked into that meeting and I said, and the CMO was with me, and said to me, and the CSR head too, and she said to me, so they want to change our values. What do you think about that? Like, it was real quick, right? And I said, I don't think they want to change your values. I think what we have is a set of core values that represents how we work with one another and how we treat anybody, regardless of in this building or whether we're out on a business trip or whether we're just walking down the street. This is what our community believes in. This is part of our identity. So I asked them, I said, why don't we establish what our identity as a company is? And they're like, I can get that. So we started to look, because there were threads between the two. So it was actually helpful to not have them separate that way.
Great feedback. Kind of to piggyback on that, in trait 1, deciding with society in mind, you say in the book, how does this decision affect company, people, society, and the environment? I think we're all drinking the Kool-Aid here in this conversation, all of us that are on the call. But how do you work with the doubtful leaders? How do you create that buy-in? It seemed like you created that buy-in with that CEO, but when you go deeper into answering these questions that create that corporate social mindset, how do you get them on board?
Yeah, and most of it comes down to the data and the research piece as well. I mean, one of my best friends within a company is anybody who's charged to figure out the consumer mindset, because sometimes in that consumer mindset or the potential prospective mindset of those that will engage in our products, goods, and services and whatever we deliver, they are either going into sort of the attributes of, would you want this, right? It's very narrowed in how it looks like. And so I'll sit down with them and I say, tell me what you know about the psyche, the understanding of what this consumer is dealing with in general. And it's often a little bit, well, we don't get into that. And I said, well, but you have to understand the context in which a consumer makes a decision, and not just in the narrow lanes of whether or not the feature benefits, environments, and all the other good things that go into traditional pieces of what we produce. And I asked that person to help me come up with a larger mindset of who our consumer is, who are the people getting our goods and services, so that we don't just look at it narrowly. And that's the data that I bring in and that we should be a part of, the people who are on this drinking the Kool-Aid, and we're all some of the same folks, right, that you just said. This is your role as leaders here, is to say, let's be mindful of what the consumer is dealing with socially, economically, all the other things that are affecting their decision, contextualizing that. That's what we make it around the data. And obviously data here too as well. I mean, in terms of those that want to have a voice, right? And I don't know if this is probably one of the questions, like, do you decide to go right in there? I've been a part of a lot of discussions. I mean, I've been a part of my time in the last year alone of 3 campaigns where a company decided to take a position. And in that conversation, we had a head of PR, we had a head CSR, CMO, we had comms, we had their agencies. I mean, the room was full of people, right? In general. And tons of data and research went into, if we took this, focus groups, right? And it kept on coming back that yes, people were going to be upset, but the vast majority were not. And in fact, reinforced and believed in the identity that we were establishing. And that is the kind of data that we need to do and understand about our own consumers as well. It's about our community. And I think the better we can get into that and understand those things, it's easier to have the kind of conversation we're talking about, rather than just saying we should just do it, because it's good work, right?
Yeah, we all like that to just be the easy answer. Moving on.
Oh, it'd be amazing, right?
That'd be awesome. I get it.
Exactly. None of us would exist, right? Be like, oh, it's just good things, right? And I mean,
been doing those years. Great, thank you. All right, another audience question. Let's see. Any tips for engaging employees on all levels with DEI initiatives without being required to attend? It seems like the same people attend the events, and this person would like to reach a broader audience. I think we all experience that. The same people volunteer, the same people come to the DEI training. How do you broaden the audience?
Overachievers, right? The overachievers. So you know how I love, if I was a CSR head or working in this space, I love to use employees to inform me about what the heck is happening out in the community. I love to engage employees to understand different communities. I want to understand different people, things that are the real conversation. And so I like to engage them, not necessarily in the volunteerism work per se, but much more of helping to inform me, and not just ERGs in general. I like to go to the person, we were working with a brand, and I said, they were gonna go help this community center and this whole thing in this area. And I said, like, we've got employees there, right? And they're like, yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so why don't we do this? What's the zip code? Let's go to HR, can we figure out who lives in those communities and actually talk about what's the situation? And we sat down with those people, because those are not the people that are attending the ERG work, and they're not attending the volunteerism work. They're not the biggest givers. And I said, hey, we're about ready to maybe do something. One, I have a role for you. I'd love to have you help us figure out how to deliver this. And then secondly, I need your help to inform us about, if we do this, what's that like? And what is the conversation? Like, for instance, on Sunday, when you went to service there, what did you talk about? Like, I want to know about the community from your perspective as well, not from just me coming in there. So I like to use employees as informants for me, as well as helping me deliver on some of the things that we want to engage others on, in addition to just that route. So I think there's so many different roles in that sort of family of opportunity there.
Yeah, those are great points. It's reaching out rather than just saying, here's our opportunity and waiting for them to come to that opportunity.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
reaching out, and I think people are honored when they're asked to help
Oh,
out with something completely, especially when
completely.
it's in their neighborhood.
Completely. Andrew, it was so funny. We did that session where we invited the employees. The first comment was, am I getting fired? That
Oh,
was that was what they thought was. I was like, no, 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 this is good things. Like this is, and I'm like, I walked out of there and I was telling the HR person, I'm like, you might have another cultural issue if that's one of the first things we're coming together. So yeah,
oh well,
because these
yeah,
people, these employees were not engaged in that way. They're not the actives, right? They're not engaged in the stuff that you and I deal with on a daily basis.
absolutely. Thank you for that response. All right, we have a lot of questions and not enough time to answer them all, so we'll just start choosing. What advice can you give for engaging people across different generations or political ideologies about these important social issues when there may be massively different opinions surrounding the approaches to the conversation and the eventual solution or solutions?
A question for 2020 for sure, right?
I'm anxious for this answer because if you could answer it, then you've probably solved a lot of our problems.
I don't. I will try to add value to this discussion. Right.
Yep.
We always, in the work that I do, I'm going to center around something first and then kind of come back. So bear with me on the journey I'm going to make here. So first and foremost, in any social issue work that a company might take on or address in the community, it should always be based on short-term or small milestones leading up to something big. And the thing that I find is that some that are ready to kind of be vocal, do all the other stuff, didn't do any of the smaller milestones first to try to see how the community was there. The second thing that I have noticed in a lot of those that have sort of misstep a little bit, we're kind of getting to that category. I don't even know if that's a question, but I might as well address it here too, is that we didn't have, we were not really a part of the community into those generations, those populations, those political ideologies. And it doesn't mean that you have to stand left or right. It means that we have people either that are there or understand them or been a part of them to see the vernacular, listening in and understanding how they perceive an issue as well. And so none of that homework is there. We usually misstep on some way, shape, or form. Or I say that, some really good marketing work might have been done where we told an incorrect story of something because to fit our model of what we wanted it to be, right? So getting back to the generational piece overall, no one, I remember it's probably like 5 years ago or so, we did this study. And one of the things that we learned in that study with consumers is nobody expected you to change the world tomorrow. They expected you to make progress towards changing the world tomorrow. And so when you're looking at some generations who might be on the extreme side of that, it's a dialogue to say, we have these milestones and this is where we have to head and where that looks like. And along the way, our plan is to have a dialogue with you and to reach these short-term milestones. And hopefully you can see our progress together. When we have a political ideology scenario is that you're choosing not to take a stance, or you're choosing to take a stance or to enter into conversation because you might be either forced or drawn into it. But at the same time, if you go back and say, we went and we listened and learned from the communities in which that this issue has affected this way, this is the position or stance that we take, you can usually buffer that a little bit in terms of it. Now, some consumers, some will talk about millennial consumers versus older consumers. I have some millennial consumers that I have a program that was done on the environment. They could come back and said it wasn't enough. It just didn't meet the mark. And so we brought those consumers in and said, we want to listen, we want to hear from you as to what it was. Because the thing is that people who represented the same population, we had actually had dialogue with. What we discovered is that there is a separate set of that population that we didn't dialogue with because we found out that they were not they were not with the same other group anymore, right? So we had a totally different group of ideological thinking. And what they really wanted us to do is not commit, but to listen and let them be heard. And that was a big, big piece about all of this. I can't completely answer because every situation is so situational, it's tough. And I hate the consultant answer on that, but that is the way you're gonna have to go with some of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all faced with, after the murder of George Floyd, the statements that came out, the donations that came from companies, and they were necessary. But I think a lot of people are saying, well, what's next? Especially employees at all levels are saying, is that it? You just check the box.
And I had worked with
how do you go deeper? And then some people are saying, I don't really want you to go deeper. I'm good with that. That covered the bases. I'd like to carry on. There's again, you talked about those who want to go with environmental. You didn't go deep enough. How do you address that's one of the hot button issues? Any advice in that regard? That was one of the questions. I kind of rephrased it, but that was one of the questions one of our people had, is that when something like that, how do you get like clients saying, you supported Black Lives Matter, we don't agree with that movement, or those statements, we're walking away from keeping business with you?
Yeah, and that's in the case of, let's use kind of the company that I worked with, where we had the research ahead of time, where we were understanding what that fallout could be. And then we did another thing based on that. And I should have clarified this earlier too, is that we not only looked at our existing consumers, but who are our prospective consumers and where their ideology was in general. And what we learned is, while we would get fallout from a certain group of people, we had our prospective consumers, the consumers that would likely purchase from us, were on in this case, the right side of history related to that maybe, or in agreement with where that was, along with the vast majority of the consumer base. So the whole group got together and decided, well, even if they leave, we still see the core of where we want to go, because this is important to us. That's the being brave part, right? Will you satisfy everybody? I mean,
tall order. Yeah.
That is.
I love it. Be brave. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. That's definitely being mindful of time. That's a great way to end, just to be brave. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I would just say, Andrea, thank you as well on the CIVIC team for all the incredible work and bringing us together today. I really do appreciate it. This work is a journey and it's hard. And so I'm glad that everybody here has come together to try to learn even more. And I appreciate everybody here today.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you both. Yeah, thank you, Derek. Thank you, Andrea. Wonderful conversation. And I do feel like we've leapt forward on our journey to redefine, just in this closing keynote alone. Appreciate you challenging us to be brave and supportive, but also authentic and relational in the work that we're leading, so we truly can add value. Excellent, excellent insights. We have been reflecting here at CIVIC about the power of corporate social responsibility to drive the recovery here in Colorado and nationally. And a number of the strategists and analysts have been telling us that CSR can be that fuel, and that folks will remember how companies have led in 2020, right? And we believe that. A number of the folks who have joined us here today have certainly reiterated that. But before we close, I do want to pause and just say, we believe in this community. And over the last several months, the CIVIC community has stepped forward in such remarkable ways, from the 22 million raised for the COVID Relief Fund to the 125 organizations that signed on to our Colorado Companies Uniting Against Racism pledge. I think this socially minded business community has proven that we are definitely stronger together, even through crisis. And even though it has been humbling in 2020, it has been so remarkable and inspiring to see this community of companies open source their own strategies to help one another to drive impact and to fuel that resiliency so that we can recover together. And that's truly the reflection for me today throughout all of the content that the speakers have shared. We want to thank you for engaging and joining us. Even without incentives, you have been sharing your own insights and experience, and we've felt the energy even virtually this year. So thank you for fully showing up. I wanted to remind you that the sessions will be available for about a year after today. So we'll have those online next week, and we'll send you a reminder about that, so not to worry. And if you did not join us as a peak ticket holder, then you can go ahead and upgrade at a small fee. So you'll be able to access all 12 of the workshops and the two keynotes as well. Before we let you go, we want to remind you that we do need your feedback so we can improve next year. And we have a final engagement prize to incent you to do that. So drum roll, please. We have a round trip flight, a gas card to get you to DIA, and a wine basket to come home to. So thank you to Suncor and TIAA and Southwest, of course, for investing in that incentive for us. So you'll get a reminder with the evaluation link, but we'll also have that link in the chat. Wanted to let you know that the platform is going to be open for networking, so feel free to hang out and connect with folks that maybe you didn't have a chance to re-engage with throughout the day. And before we close, we do want to again pause and thank our extraordinary chairs, Sarah Hogan and Andrea Miller. Thank you so much for your leadership in 2020. And also the talented mastermind behind the scenes, Jess Welser of BCIVIC. Thank you, Jess, for everything you've done to make today a success. And of course, our sponsors, Suncor, BF Corp, Southwest Airlines, Delta Dental of Colorado, First Bank, Barefoot PR, DeVita, Otten Johnson, TIAA, QEP, Peak Resources, and Excel Energy. All right, we can't wait to see you all again. In the meantime, we are here for you, and we hope that you stay well, you stay strong, you stay brave. Take care. We'll see you soon.